Hey guys, Tarke here, and I've started another set of Patreon build reviews. This is just a little spoiler for what's going to be coming on the channel. I'll be uploading 1 to 2 of these a day, basically every day going forward. We've got a max block bleed bow build from Greg, which is what we're doing today. An Archmage cremation build from Zach. I've actually looked into this build. This build looks very interesting. We've got Andrew with EK Trickster, also console players, stand up. Chris with a Hollow Palm. Tony with the Frostblades Champion. Numbers, who's a new player, just starting at the end of Metamorph with an Archmage Stormbrand. Richard with a crit Facebreaker Cyclone. And Ian with a Magma Orb Deadeye. So thank you everyone. Let's just start off and let's go through what Greg sent me in his notes. Hi, I've always checked out your videos right before League start, and this League I noticed you are now doing build reviews, which is awesome and prompted me to sub via Patreon. He actually wrote that. I've been toying with a max block bow build for a while, and when I saw the new Asilium, I was hoping that I could leverage it to get a cheaper and beefier Puncture for bossing. Good pick. However, after multiple attempts and different variations, the PUB below is the best I've come up with. I realise I have to sacrifice damage for max block, but it feels like the sacrifice is very costly, and I'd love any input or suggestions you have. My initial goals of the build would take about a 500k Puncture DPS, similar numbers to my Split Arrow, while staying above 6k health and being at max block with a Roomies active. Not sure that's possible anymore, so anything you can offer that will help me stay alive longer in boss fights like Cirrus Elder's Guardians would be great. I've been trying to stay under 10x the build, but would be happy to put more into it if I think it could keep me alive enough to farm bosses. Now, funny enough, I've actually just been planning out basically this build myself, not with the block variant, but because of that, I've got a pretty good idea of how I'd go about building the character. So let's just start off by looking through his skills, looking through his items, and then we'll, make a couple of changes, but immediately I know I'm going to shove a big fat old cluster jewel in there. So off the bat, the tree looks fairly normal. Outside of these points seem a bit odd. But yeah, it's fairly standard routing. A lot of them are coming up sort of that way. Obviously, since he's going for max block, he's forsaking the challenger charges and outmatch and outlast. Really hurts to drop challenger charges. It's one of the most attractive things about playing a Gladiator, is you get that zoom. But he wants to go super tank, so instead he's getting Pain Forged, which gives him chance to block attacks if you're damaged by a hit recently. Increased damage if you've taken no damage from hits recently. Cannot be stunned by hits you block. And then Versatile Combatant. Chance to block spell damage is equal to block attacks. And obviously the maximum block for spells is the same. So for his skills, Split Arrow Pierce, Chance to Bleed, Vicious Proj, Deadly Elements, Brutality. These are the standard links that everyone runs. If they've got like a Lionized chest piece, they drop the Pierce, but that's standard. Some people use Rain of Arrows once they've got good enough gear, but Split Arrow is much more like low gear friendly. Puncture, Brutality, Deadly Elements, Vicious Proj, only in a 4-link because he's got it in the Snipe Helmet, which is something a lot of people are doing. Ensnaring Arrow, Ballista Totem, War Banner, Greater Multiple Projectiles. I would add a Maim in here because he didn't have Maim on his other links. He might have it somewhere else. Pride, Herald of Purity, Dash, Culling Strike, Summon Flame Golem, Flesh and Stone, okay, there you had it. Cast damage taken, Vol, Molten Shell. So the links are pretty decent. I'm not sure if I would run the Herald of Purity personally. I was planning on running Pride, Flesh and Stone, War Banner for my character. He might have some gear reservation because I'm not sure how he's able to also fit in the Herald of Purity. Herald of Purity is decent though because it does add a bunch of flat physical. And it looks like he's got culling linked in there, so it's also culling bosses. So maybe he's got some reduced reservation. Oh, he's using the chase item chest. I never thought I would see the day that someone would send me a build using Iron Fortress. Okay. He's using a pretty basic Elder Bow. You would ideally like getting the dot multi on. If this is a bow he actually has, like if he actually got the weapon as is, this is like very good for just master crafting. Percent fizz, flat fizz, but you want as much flat physical as possible for these builds. So if this is the actual base bow he has, this is decent. but we could make him a much better bow. He's using rear guard as a quiver because he's trying to do the whole block thing. Not actually that bad of a quiver. It does give some flat physical, being a broadhead. Good unique quivers that he could use instead is Maloney's, which give him blind. It just has a bunch of damage because it has up to 60% ailment damage with a bunch of flat fizz, life, chaos, res, attack speed against blinded enemies. I'm not going to change the helmet. I really like this helm. This chest piece I'm going to drop. It's just not worth it. It's giving him no life. He wanted to maintain above 6k life. It gives him chance to block spell damage as unlucky, which is bad if your whole thing is built around block. So we're going to drop this. We can cap out his block without it. And then these, if he actually has these, yep, very solid. Physical damage, overtime multiplier, flat life, some chance to block on there. His boots, I'm guessing these are actual boots he owns because no one would randomly craft 45 life, 35 auras, but they're fine boots. They just could do with a bit more life. Yeah, this is where he was getting the reduced mana reservation from. And then he's got, if he actually has 2 Circle of Guilt, amazing. Wouldn't change those. You would want a Raslatha's Coil for this build. That'd be another advantage of dropping the rear guard, putting the Raslatha's Coil in. I hate Witchfire Brew. Really dislike it as a flask. We can fit vulnerability on hit into a setup, so I'm going to cut some of the like surplus. Right, I don't like golems. Golems get you killed. So while it does give you some DPS, we're dropping this. We're also going to try and push this puncture damage as hard as we can. So this is going... this is going... I'm going to replace all these links with how I would set them up, and I'm just going to reorder them a little bit. So that I'm not changing, that I'm not changing, that I'm going to move. Okay, so this is what I would do. This is what I'm planning out for the build that I was doing. I'm so cool. I don't know if anyone else does this. I take notes on my phone to myself as if I was writing like a forum build guide. I don't know if you can see this very clearly. There you go. And I actually like label every single thing with all the flasks I would run, all the different mods, all the links. I like highlight everything. Basically, I'm very fun at parties. I'm very cool. So, this guy's all about being tanky. He just wants to be tanky. So I'm actually going to change the routing a little bit because he needs int. So I'd rather route through this int node here. I really like Battle Cry. One change they made this patch is instant skills on left click will automatically trigger. There was a small stutter, but the latest patch actually fixes that problem. So you can have Enduring Cry on left click with this button and have 100% up time of endurance charges. I'm going to drop these points. I'm also going to do that. And whoops. Now that's especially good if you do take Outmatch and Outlast. Obviously, because he's taking these points, he's not. But the reason why that's particularly good if you do the Outmatch and Outlast route is it gives you that 10% reduced physical and they've taken while at maximum endurance charges. 3 endurance charges is 12%. So with that and that, you'd have 22% just flat reduction. Very strong. Personally, I prefer routing through the attack speed. Routing through the physical damage as a wash, but I would just route through the attack speed because it feels slightly better in my opinion. And you don't really get any attack speed in these builds. So any attack speed you can get is great. The reason why he's routing through Cloth and Chain is because he's putting a Red Nightmare here, which is currently giving him a whole bunch of block and spell block. I might drop that, but we might keep it as is. I'm going to fill in all of these nodes, and again, he's got a Red Nightmare here, which is giving him a bunch of block and as such spell block through Versatile Compassant. These 3 points, I would much rather spend on these 3 points because he's took these points for endurance charges. So I'm going to drop that. And then we can go 1, 2, 3 versus 1, 2. So we could save a point that way, or we could go 1, 2. And that also gives him some dexterity, which he was struggling with. And then that will let us drop some of these nodes. Routing up this way is good if you take a cluster jewel. He currently doesn't have a cluster jewel. We're going to try and fit a cluster jewel in, so we're probably going to have to cut a couple more points. We're probably going to be cutting these. Another thing we could do to try and boost up his block chance, instead of going super crazy on the red nightmares, is we could make his routing look like this. And put a Kevlava jewel here. This would convert this node. And his block chance would be doubled. He'd only take 50% reduction from blocks. But if he just had that there, he could then drop like half of the block investment he has and just hit block cap through Painful, Versatile Combatant, and a rear guard. But anyway, I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. If you do have a Times Jewel, definitely just shove one in here and then route that way rather than this way. But assuming he doesn't have one, let's go for that routing. Let's go back to cleaning up his skills. Isn't Red Nightmare limited to 1? It is limited to 1. That is a very good point, sir. So let's do this. Actually, let's just quickly see which one was giving him more block. So 48, 48. One there pushes him to 59, and one there pushes him to 54. So we keep that one, and we drop that one, save us a bunch of skill points. I'd be very tempted to grab Iron Reflexes, because he's trying to be tanky. So I'd shove those 2 points in there, so those points end up there, so the points are still a wash. Another thing you could do is you could shove a Lionized Jewel here. If you put a Lionized Jewel and this is if you're just trying to pump as much damage as possible, you can then grab all of these nodes. Now, a Lionized Jewel doesn't actually hit this last node here, but it doesn't matter because the Bleed You Inflict deal damage 50% faster still do hit it. So you can see that 174... 98. Obviously, it's because we removed like all of his scaling, but it's big. It's big. So if you want the damage, just shove that in there. Pez. If you go for that to keep the cluster jewel, you then need to cut as many points as possible. So you then will probably end up routing out of this way. You'd drop like all of Gladstar. You'd probably have to drop these points as well. And you'd do a tree that looked kind of something like that. This is just options. I'm going through all the different options because cluster jewels are very powerful for this build. And, yeah, you just need to be a bit creative with how you route the tree. If you plan on utilizing them, which I would plan on utilizing, and I'll add a bunch of example cluster jewels in a second. So, this is how I would set up the links. So, I'd run a Val Molten Shell, a Dash, a Second Wind, and then an Increased Duration. The reason why this is so powerful is the Second Wind gives Dash another charge. The Second Wind also reduces the cooldown of Molten Shell, which you want to be spamming. And then the increased duration makes Molten Shell last better, so just have that in there. It's just pretty good synergy. If you do the Enduring Cry on the left click meme, you could also shove your Enduring Cry in here, because it would give you additional charge in your Enduring Cry. And the increased duration would scale the life regeneration you get. So you don't have to go for these 3 points. It's purely like luxury. So it'd be one of the first things you would cut. But if you want the endurance charge generation, that's what I would do. And I would add it into these links here. Since he's running the Asilium helmet, he's got 2 6 links. 6 links in chest, 6 link in bow. Or say 6 link and then like a 5 link, because you don't really need 2 6 links. So that's kind of locked in there. I would run Pride, Flesh and Stone, and War Banner as my 3 auras. I know that he's got the amulets with the reduced reservation, so he can mess around with some other things. But that's just what I would go for personally. I don't think I'd mess around with the Herald of Purities. I would just go for just those bog standard ones. You could also shove a floating Enduring Cry in this last link here, if you didn't want to put it into this setup. You could also go for a Enlighten to reduce the levels, or increase duration for the War Banner if you actively use your War Banner or whatever. And then finally, you've got a few different options here. I really don't like Witchfire Brute. You're using 2 Circle of Guilt, so you're not going to be getting vulnerability on hit there. So if you to get vulnerability on hit, you'd have to corrupt your gloves, which is something very expensive, and he said he wants to keep the cost low, so he's probably not going to do that. So we're going to set up a Ensnaring Arrow cast on hit setup. So you do Ensnaring Arrow, curse on hit, vulnerability, and then you could shove either GNP or maim on these links. If you felt like your damage was good enough, you could put maim into your split arrow if you felt like you could still clear easily. Otherwise, you can shove maim on your ensnaring arrow. If you have got curse on hit elsewhere, I would then use either a Mirage Archer GMP or a Ballista GMP. From the very little testing I've done, I prefer Ballista Totem GMP purely because of the visuals. I don't like having the Mirage Archer above my head. Also, the placement speed of Ballista Totems is near instant. Also worth mentioning, if you are a champion, a lot of people transition to champion from Gladiator with these builds with big investment. Conqueror, if you then have the Ballista Totem and Snaring Arrow set up, you then have the ballistas that taunt off of you, and if a totem taunts an enemy with the Conqueror node, that's 20% damage reduction, which is super strong. So just something worth considering there. Now, I dropped your chest piece. I would go with a rare chest piece, or I'd go with the perfect form. It might make gearing or resist a little bit awkward with this many uniques on, but if you take Iron Reflexes, he said he wanted a super tanky character. Perfect form is incredibly powerful. The reasoning being is it gives you phase acrobatics, and he's all about, I just want to be tanky, tanky, tanky. You layer some dodge on top of your block, and it gives you a whole chunk of armor because we're doing Iron Reflex memes. So let's shove that in there. Fortunately, he gets quite a lot of resists on the tree through here. We did cut these nodes, but he could put those nodes back in. I'm now going to give you some example of some Clossagel setups you'd go for. Also, let's sort that back to the Red Nightmare, since you wanted to drop those points. And at 81 points, we can fit in a pretty decent Clossagel setup. So, for Clossagels... he's going to want an attack or a physical damage with as few points as possible, so have a look. He's not going to want that. He doesn't want the Impale. Devastator gives you some attack damage, some ailment damage, chance to explode. This does actually stack with Bleed Explosion, so he could go for it. He doesn't need it, though. Drive the Destruction, he doesn't need. Feed the Fury gives some increased damage while leeching, some attack speed while leeching. Decent quality of life, it's okay. Fuel the Fight gives you Mana Leech. If you haven't got any Mana Leech on gear and you don't take Mana Leech on the tree, it's a solid option. Also, if you're starved on Intelligence in this build, I'd highly recommend taking Mana Flows for 2 points. It's very efficient in terms of mana regeneration, and that can actually make quite the big difference. Ziggy was having some issues when he was running Simulacrum, even though he had some physical leech in his character, because he was a bleed-based build, didn't do that much hit damage. On the 20 Simulacrum waves, he was actually running to issues where he just couldn't sustain on his Mana Leech alone, so if he had 2 points in Mana Flows, that would have actually solved his problems. So that's just one thing to consider, so maybe Fuel the Fight is a node we'll go for. Vicious Skewering, nope, don't need that. Not very good suffixes. Heavy Hitter, increased damage with ailments, so that's fine. Martial Prowess gives some attack speed, some damage with ailments is fine. Smite the Weak. Attack damage against maimed enemies, that's decent because you always maim with blood in the eyes. So let's just check if there is anything better on the bow damage nodes. You don't need Arcing. Broadside, you don't need the AoE. Calamitous, we don't want. Deep Cuts is the Impale, we don't want that. Devastator is the Leech thing again. Vicious Skewering, nope. Tempered Arrowheads. Both skills have dot multi. Increased duration of ailments, that seems pretty good. Yeah, you could go for that. I'd probably just go for an attack one. Let's see if there's anything decent on the physical ones as well. Battle hardened, physical damage, evasion, and armor. I already prefer that to what we've seen before. Master the fundamentals, all res, very good. He's using a lot of unique, so I'm already favoring this one. Force multiply, he doesn't need. Furious assault is okay, it gives him attack speed. Grim oath doesn't help him. So we're gonna go for 2 jewels, master the fundamentals, and then say battle hardened. Seems fine. We need to add another node. We want ideally to just get these 2 nodes on the front, and we're going to ignore this node at the back. So let's add Furious Assault. Does that reshuffle them around? Master Fundamentals, Battle Hardened. Yeah, brilliant. The reason why we don't care about those nodes is we're mostly just doing it to get to the medium jewels, and these just give some nice physical damage scaling, some all res, some armor and evasion. He's scaling a bunch of armor, he's scaling a bunch of evasion. Oh, we've added that in there. And now we'll add in 2 mediums. You have a few options. You can run a Fizz Dot as your most damage, obviously, and then you could use like 1 Flask Jewel. There's quite a lot of good stuff on the Flask durations. You either need 4 or 5 passive, doesn't matter which, never 6 passives. And large, always eye level 75 higher, with 2 jewels. Wouldn't bow jewels be a lot better now? Yeah, the bow jewels would be a lot better now. You could just go for a bow jewel. I kind of like having all res. It's generic, and it's got a bit more defense. But yeah, bow jewel would be more damage actually. Worth mentioning. I really like not fasting. Which one is it? I really like Mendes Wellspring for the increased life recovery, the life charge, and the remove bleeding. You don't need it though. I would probably just go for 2 Fizz DPS jewels, which are physical damage every time multiplier. Right. Wasting Affliction gives damaging ailments deal damage 10% faster, increased damage with ailments. That one I very like, but we'll go through all of them in case I missed a good one. He's not going to use an axe or sword. Vivid Hues. Dot multi while bleeding. It's decent. Attack damage linked to his life is okay. Vile Revigoration he doesn't need. Student of Decay he doesn't need. Steady Torment. He's not poisoning and bleeding, so that's a no. Rend gives 12%, 30 bleed duration is solid. Hemorrhage, he's not critting. Flow of Life is solid if you just want to fit more life in. Exposure Therapy is solid if you want to fit in Chaos Res, because you have no Chaos Res on your gear. Nope. Nope, you won't want to stick on things which give you the multiplier. Circling Oblivion's okay because it gives increased duration of ailments, but we have better options. Brush with Death is very solid to get some percent life recovery on kill. I'd probably recommend having one of those in your build. And let's say he had 1 Brush with Death, just a 1% life recovery on kill, because that will make your character feel a lot smoother while mapping. So we'll shove 1 in there, and then on the other medium jewel, we'll go for, was it Rend? Was it that I liked? Rend and Wasting Affliction. And then any suffixes you can get, great, but I would just alt regal these. So it helps if I add jewels onto them. That is generally a good thing to do. And on the jewels as well, we have some interesting options, and this is where we're going to be filling up his block a little bit. Right, let's fill that in. So now you can go boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. 95. So we might need to trim some points off, but we can do that easily enough. And then for the small jewels, you have quite a few options. So if you're going for just as much, if like you want to go 100% ailment immunity, which is something you can very easily do, with 2 small jewels of dodge with elegant form, 30% chance to avoid elemental damage from ailments, 3% dodge, 2% spell dodge. You can get this to 3 passives with a 2-point, and that's including the jewel itself. 2 of these gives you 60% chance to avoid ailments with 6% dodge, spell dodge. You can craft 25% chance to avoid ailments on your gloves and then anoint crystal skin, and you would have 100% ailment immunity. And you would also then have 6, 8% dodge, 6% spell dodge. If you're doing the whole perfect form thing, it just adds another layer on top of the whole block vibes. But if you're just going pure in, I just want to be a block boy, then you can get the block equivalent. It's slightly weaker, the block equivalent. I can't remember exactly what it's called though. You could also go for one of these for endurance charge generation. It gives another 6% block, so this could be a solid option if you want to use one of these. Flexible Sentry, this is the one. So this one gives 5% less chance to avoid ailments. Slightly annoying, but still very workable. So with 2 of these, you'd have 50%, and then you'd have 25% on gloves. And then if you're using a rare chest piece, you could craft some there. You could also go for Shaper Boots to get 35% there. So you could do Shaper Boots, Anoint Crystal Skin, 2 of these jewels, 100% ailment immunity. Most people just do it on gloves and helmet because he's using unique helmet, he can't do that. So I would say either use these nodes or go for a endurance charge one, because that will give you more block and it will give you the endurance charges. I've already lost track of it, sorry. So that would be a solid option, and we'll just look at some other things he could go for that seem decent. So let's have a look, see. He doesn't need the leech. He doesn't use a shield. He is channeling, but he'd rather have the block up all the time. Second skin gives some armor, but it's not that great. Rope reinforcement gives a little bit of flat life. It gives you less chance to block, but it gives you more life. But you'd rather have the higher chance to block, because that then also turns into spell block. He's not using a shield. Powerful Ward, he doesn't need power charges. One with a shield, he doesn't use a shield. Mystical Ward, he doesn't need ES stuff. Mage Hunter, doesn't need power charges. Mage Bane, he's not dual wielding. So yeah, so I'd go for either Flexible Sentry or Enduring Ward, and if you've capped out your block, you can just go for a Life Jewel and go for like Fettle or Surging Vitality. So let's say that he went for 1 Enduring Ward. Where did that go in? 1 Enduring Ward. Bump. And that's an easy way to get your block up super high. You could even go for 2 if all you cared about was just getting as much block as possible. And by doing that setup, you're then up to 63, 63. Obviously, you need to cut points, so places you can cut points from. Because you've gained a bunch of damage in here, you've gained more damage here than you get from this cluster. You could then go 1, 2, and cut that off. Obviously, your dex needs to be filled up on gear. You can also go 1, 2, 3, and drop Duelist Star, and then you're looking at level 91 tree. Still 195% life, and this is fluff points you could cut. You could instead just go 2 points there, so... You know, you've got a lot of options in terms of what you do and don't include in the build. So we're saying those are his gloves. Let's say that's his body armor. That's his boots. So we've got 3 remaining flex slots. So what we're going to do with those 3 remaining flex slots. So we're just going to make a list of things that you can fit into the build. You can shove in an Enduring Cry. You can shove in a Phase Run. If you do the Instant War Cry node, you could go Enduring Cry and Rallying Cry. You could fit in a Portal Gem, obviously, if you like Portal Gems. You could shove an Empower linked to your dash. You could put a Culling Strike on your Ensnaring Arrow setup. In the case of having a random, like, floating 5-6 link, I would probably go crazy on the Ensnaring Arrow links and do, like, a big Ballista setup or something. But, yeah. Hopefully that was helpful. We will just quickly do a better bow, better flasks. But otherwise, the gear's pretty spot on. I would strongly consider running a perfect form. You can also just use a rare chest and craft block on that, and that's another way to cap out your block. And as always, a Kevlar Jewel would be incredibly powerful and would cap out your block, and all you'd have to do is add these points onto the tree. So doing the iron reflexes, assuming you're not doing the 100% ailment of immunity thing, which is very, very strong. And I would recommend most people just go for easy ailment immunity these days. He's already got a Roomies of a Granite. So now let's fill in a Jade Flask. Just call it Grounding, because you want Shock Immune. I would then use a Quicksilver of Adrenaline. And then... See, it's kind of annoying. You can't run a Grounding if you're running the Roomies, because you still need Curse and Freeze and Bleed Removal. If you didn't want the Bleed Removal on your Life Flask, you could go for the Flask Duration node that I showed you earlier on Medium Jewels to get your Bleed Removal that way. You could also go for Corrupting Blood on a, like, Jewel Corruption or something. But yeah, for the final flask slot, I would use a Quartz Flask. Quartz is very strong, phasing's very powerful this league. Also, since we're now adding layers of dodge into the build, it just is quite nice to just like lean into that a little bit harder. And then obviously a Life Flask of Bleed Removal if you don't have Bleed Removal elsewhere. This Jewel then now becomes a Life Jewel. Not Cobalt, sorry. Doesn't really matter, but ideally you just want life, and then if you can get physical damage, you can get Fizz Leech's mana on a Jewel if you haven't got it on Jewelry, which you don't because you haven't got it on your rings. So that might just be something to consider in terms of flexibility, and then like a damage mod would be great. Or if you're like missing stats, like int dex, whatever. Let's say that you just had like a damage over time, life, and then some mana leech, because that would just make the build feel a lot smoother. I'm gonna try and fit a Raslava's Coil in there. I know they are quite expensive, so if you can't afford one, fair enough. But it's very powerful. The reason why it's such a massive DPS increase is you can shove Catalysts on these to scale up even further. And with bleeds, you only care about getting one really big meaty hit, nothing else. And it still gives you a good chunk of life, a bunch of flat physical damage, and some strength, which just is more damage. But yeah, Raslava's Coil, if you can afford the Circle of Guilt, you can afford a Raslava's Coil, basically. Huge DPS increase. Now, assuming that you have got the double Circle of Guilt and the Raslava's Coil, and you want to use a Rearguard, and you want to use an Asilium, you probably can't get away with running Perfect Form. The other nice thing about Perfect Form, sorry, is it would give you the Arctic Armor, which would be another floating link you could run. And the Arctic Armor is pretty nice with the snipe ability, because you have to stand still to snipe, so it's just going to be like more mitigation. But let's say that you just ran a rare chess piece instead, and you could go for like an Astral, just to get even more res, to make gearing out your res even easier. Sorry, I said glorious. So an Astral play, you could go for a Warlord's chess piece of minus 15 mana cost of skills to make your split arrow feel a little bit comfier. Otherwise, you're just going to go for like as much life as possible. Let's have a quick look, see if there are any good influence mods. I think there's some cool Warlord mods you'd like. And crafting on Warlord mods is always strong. Also, on Hunter Boots, you can get increased physical damage over time. So let's have a look, see. So, for Shaper, you could go for +1 active skill gems. Fizz taken as elements is always very powerful. Nothing that great there. Fizz taken as fire is very good. Percent life is very good. Recover life on kill is very good, so Elder would be fine. Crusader could give you enemies you kill explode. This would stack with the bleed explosions. Consecrated Ground while you're stationary is decent with Snipe. Fizz taken as lightning is good. Redeemer, you can get nearby enemies are blinded. You use Flesh and Stone, so that's fine. Chance to get a Frenzy Charge on hit would be pretty nice. Fizz taken as cold is solid. And then Hunter, you can get percent life. You can apply additional Curse, which is good DPS. Warlords can give you Endurance Charge Generation, Socketed Attacks of minus mana cost I mentioned earlier. Fizz taken as fire. Fizz taken as fire is the best of all of them, because if you don't have complete ailment immunity, if you take a big physical hit and it's converted to lightning, you can get shocked, and with cold you can get frozen. Ignite still screws you around, but it's the least scary of the ailments, so I generally prefer Fizz taken as fire. Otherwise, you could just go for an incursion chest piece with % life. But yeah, so let's just say you just want that. A solid life roll, it's just got like 100 flat life. Very easy to get like 150 life chests. In my private league, I had 150 life incursion chest with 10% life on it, and then I craft an additional 8% life. You can just like stack crazy amounts of life on a chest piece these days. But there is actually a block mod that you can craft. So that can go up to 7%, so that'll be up to 70. It's definitely an option. You can also go for like a multi-modded chest with that. Like if you had like a decent Warlords, Elder, whatever chest piece, Hunter, even just a decent incursion, you could like go multi-mod, block attacks, and like % life or something. But let's just say that you just had whatever, right? And then just like a bunch of resists, right? We're now going to make you a new bow real quick, and then that will be this build over with. Citadel bows are the preferred base because they have the highest top end. They also have a lower dex requirement, which is nice for your build because currently you have a lot of dex. We don't have 222. If you want to zoom it up, you could also go for a Maraketh bow for 10% movement speed. But I would say go with the Citadel bow. You'll do more damage and also makes your dex requirements easier. So you're going to want it to be Elder, at least eye level 83. And you're going to use Fossil spam or Alt Regal spam, even just Chaos spam. But the most important mod, obviously, is getting you Bleed. There's only one tier, doesn't matter, but you need eye level 83 to unlock it. And then you're just hoping to get as much flat physical as you can get. So just like a decent flat fizz roll. And you can see even just with tier 5 flat fizz in this mod, it's already a bleed increase over your Maraketh bow with the dot multi. So just, you know, you could even just have this mod and just like craft multi-mod flat fizz % fizz. But let's say you had like, I don't know, tier 3 and like tier 3 fizz or something. It's not that insane. So it's like, you know, see your bleed DPS shoots all the way up. And then say you hit those mods, good like suffixes to craft on there. One of the there's a quality attack speed, which is quite nice because the quality will increase your flat fizz and it still gives you some attack speed. So I would try and go for something sort of like that, and you can see it's a huge DPS increase over what you currently have on. And yeah, you can add a bunch of extra DPS mods in there. You could shove the Lionized Jewel in here, as I said, and pick up Cleaving, Slaughter, Razor's Edge. Personally, I don't think the full block meme is really worth it. I would much sooner go for Outmatch, Outlast, Arena Challenger, and then do stuff with Perfect Form, use the dodge small jewels that I showed you, and I would lean more into like a dodge setup. You could then drop the rear guard and run a Hunter Quiver with physical damage over time multiplier, stacked flat fizz, like 100 life, and that would make you feel a lot tankier because you'll be killing things faster and you're going to have more EHP. Having EHP is very important, especially since you're using 2 slots here with no life, 3 slots with the Asilium, which also has no life, and then the rear guard is 4 slots with no life. 4 slots with no life really hurts, even though you've got 203% life on the tree, which is loads. When you've got that much with not giving you life, it's not worth it. I'd also drop this point because you're trying to cut as many points as possible for cluster jewels, and yeah, I'd rather have an extra life node in here. So you can see that with this just basic setup, you'd be looking at 40k armor. You've gained some life, you've gained a bunch of damage, and you can push the damage much, much, much higher with the Lionized Jewel, as I said in here. But anyway, I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Thank you very much for the support, Greg, and I'll leave links to everything down below. Bye-bye.